Hi everyone, welcome to episode 185 of the Citrix Session. I'm your host, Andy Whiteside. I guess I'm your host for today. Bill Sutton and Todd Smith are with me. Bill's the normal host. I told Bill he could take a break from kicking this off, and I would do it this time. Excited to be here, excited to be talking about NetScaler and how it really does act like a Swiss Army knife, and specifically in today's conversation around being all things security, front-ending those applications, not just Citrix, but other applications that all need that extra layer of security on the front end. Before we jump into this, I want to, do the XenTegra commercial. If you're a Citrix or a cloud software group customer, Citrix specifically, Citrix NetScaler, Zen Server, if you're using those technologies, chances are you don't have a partner that is all in on them the way we are, and we can help you. Please reach out, use LinkedIn, reach out to myself, Bill Sutton, ping Todd, give Todd some accolades for doing this podcast. But if you have needs, if you're just looking for a support contract, I mean, that's probably the number one thing we can help our clients with. It's just a minimal support contract so that when you pick up the phone, somebody they know you, somebody who's invested time into getting to know you is available to help you with work through whatever it is. And if it gets too challenging and we need to call Citrix support, we're going to go in and call them together. And it's going to be a hand-in-hand partnership type thing to make sure you're getting what you need. Todd, how many of your customers these days have some elevated Citrix support contract in place?
Um, so all the customers that I have are eligible for unified services,
Mhm.
which is kind of our all-encompassing services agreement. Um, but the majority of them are, they're using support as needed. Um,
Yeah.
they're leveraging some of the environment information that we provide and things like that. But there's definitely a need out there for partners like yourselves to step up and
Yeah.
get to know the customer more intimately and kind of embed yourself in the customer's operational responsibilities within their environment, and keeping it modern, keeping it stable, keeping it optimized. I mean, those are critical things nowadays.
I tell you, this comes up a lot. We have customers that are our customers. They just don't have support contracts for whatever in place, and I think they don't know we have them. And they get to a point where something's critical, and they've been working with Citrix support for a little bit, and they haven't made progress, and they all of a sudden will call us up and ask us, like, "Why didn't you come to us first? Then we could have done the Citrix together." And yeah, 9 out of 10 times, maybe it's 8 out of 10, 4 out of 5. We don't even have to
Yeah.
call Citrix support. We know what they've got going on. We know their level of aptitude, and we're able to help them get it solved beforehand. Bill, would you say that's a fairly accurate
Yeah,
description?
it's very accurate. A lot of times we don't find out till after the fact, and we're being asked to escalate or other things. And not in every case, but in many cases, I think we're able to help or at least steer them in the right direction, and even get on the phone with Citrix with them,
Yeah.
which helps a lot.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's, Citrix reaching out to us during off hours and the customer doesn't have to, be standing by the phone. There's value there.
Yeah.
All right. So the blog for today that Bill and Todd had brought forward here, it says, and Bill, apparently there was a webinar you were introduced to this on last week, I believe.
Correct.
Leading the quantum ready transition, how NetScaler, Citrix NetScaler, I still got to call it Citrix NetScaler, helps prevent a silent data breach, decades in the making. This is by Abhilash Varma, good friend of XenTegra's. Todd, why this one? Why, from your perspective, why this article?
So this is preventing future attacks, and what you can do to not prevent them from happening, but preventing the potential for an attack to happen, right? So we refer to this as post quantum computing, and think of it as, you know what, I'm gonna do something today to collect data, and I may not be able to decipher it today, but I can do it in the future. I know the technology is going to be there in the future. So classic example, if I were to go and collect someone's usernames and passwords, or IP addresses, or hash tables, a variety of different security methods that are used today, and exploit them in the future when the technology comes up where I could actually do some of these things kind of quicker, and with more success. I'm gonna store some things away, and I'll get to it when the opportunity is correct. Right. By that time, most people have forgotten about it, or they weren't even aware that there was an issue. So this article really kind of digs into what Citrix is doing now, to secure our customers in the future.
Yeah. Whether they realize it or know it or not.
Yeah.
Yeah. Hey, Bill, I'm sorry. I kind of did the intro and then I kind of took over. I'll give it back to you, but why this article coming off of last week and how does that compare to what Todd said?
Yeah, I think the key thing that folks need to know is that the encryption standards that we use today, the SSL encryption standards that we use for connectivity, to Citrix applications, to any websites, pretty much anything, are largely it's today with today's computing capabilities, it's very difficult to decrypt those by brute force. So folks have tried, and it's possible to do it, but it takes a very, very long time. Really, it takes so much time, it's really not even feasible. But with quantum computing, some of what we're using today and have been using is definitely capable within a matter of hours. The article alludes to that. I've read some articles about this. It's a rather interesting topic in the sense that these quantum computers, which are probably 5 to 10 years out before they really start to be used, have the ability to crack encryption algorithms that we're using pretty much standard today. And like Todd said, one of the key problems with this, it may not sound like it's a major issue today. Okay, so we'll evolve our standards down the road. The challenge is this harvest now, decrypt later concept, which is where bad actors can harvest the data, like medical information or financial information. Maybe they hack in somehow to a hospital, which we know has happened in the world, a lot of places recently. But they hack into a medical database and they capture all the encrypted medical data. They can't look at it now, but 3 to 5 years from now, leveraging quantum computer, they may have the capability, probably will have the capability to crack that and have access to that data and then use it in some manner, I suppose, to get Bitcoin or something else. So that's really where this comes in. And then we'll get into more of the details about how NetScaler impacts this in a few minutes.
Hey, Bill, you've got the control of the screen, so I'll let you walk through with Todd, and I'll chime in along the way. But you know what? What you just said scares the heck out of me.
Yeah, me too. And there was actually I think it was a 60 Minutes article about quantum computing several months ago that talked about this, not quite in these details, but in the sense that a lot of encryption algorithms are going to be at risk once this really comes into production.
It's funny you say that because I saw that article on 60 Minutes, that episode.
Yeah.
And as much as I should be in tune with, how we're going to address that, this never once came to me that you would put an application firewall type of device in front of it, and that was going to be your best bet.
Exactly. Todd, thoughts on what we just talked about?
Yeah. So I think a lot of this comes down to a lot of the standards that are currently in use, are not going to be able to be used in the future, right? So there's end of life. NIST has already come out with some recommendations around National Institute of Science and Technology, which really controls a lot of the policies in the rules in the governance that kind of follows around the cybersecurity world. They've come out with some pretty strong opinions and guidelines around what should be done in the future, and they've end of lifed a couple of the standards that are used today in preparation for some of these changes, right? So, as an example, if you have, if you're transmitting data securely, there's the concept of the hash table, which is used to figure out what the encoding needs to be. The hash table has a time to live. Oftentimes, that lifespan of that could be several years.
Mm-hmm.
Well, if it's going to be around for several years, that means if I store it now, I've got a couple of years that I can still go and hit that hash table and decrypt that information. Question is, how long do we need to have these things live? How long do we need to make sure that the hash table is one of those pieces of data that cannot be stored, replicated, duplicated, or basically saved, right? A lot of these things are having impact on the way we think about cryptography, the way that we think about computing in general, and the way we think about data transmissions, right? So what's going to be available today, what's going to be available in the future, and how do we make sure that we still have a usable system in the future that is even more secure than currently what we're doing, right? So this is a lot. Some of this is forward thinking, but a lot of this is the reality that we live in today, which is we need to start preparing ourselves to make sure that we're not exposing something in the future that we should have cleared up or locked down today. And there's a lot of examples out there, whether it be medical information, health records, electronic and medical records, financial information, specifically financial information that was historical in nature. Think about it as, a way that you can prevent your bank from going in the background, someone exploits a bank and they go and reverse transactions that were done multiple years ago.
Right.
And having to do things like recalculate interest rates or recalculating service charges or recalculating transactions that are between. I mean, those are some pretty considerable risks out there. And then we talk about, those are two examples that would impact you as an individual. And then we start talking about, well, what about intellectual property and what about, state secrets and classified communications, right? So there's some critical things there that are at risk.
Exactly. Yep. And the next section here says, what should you do about it? And kind of covers the concept that this sounds like a future problem, but it isn't. You really need to start planning for this now. And there's even a quote in here. Gartner claims proactive planning to avoid the devastating and widespread, those in quotes, impact of quantum computers on asymmetric cryptography will reduce costs and improve operational efficiency. It says very clearly that only 5% of organizations have a roadmap for this. And I think it's something that we really need that customers really need to start looking at and considering. And they talk about a little bit here about a timeline. You want to walk through that real quick? One of you?
Yeah. So I think the first thing we need to look at before we get into the timeline is, the chip manufacturers are already coming out with quantum chips, right?
Yeah.
They're already coming out with, at first you had chipsets that were designed to work in serial with each other, right? So every single thread could only follow that thread. And then you started getting parallel processing where you had multiple threads that could be initiated, right? So that increased the capabilities of the chips, of the capabilities of the processors. And then you started getting this mesh capability, which is really what quantum computing is. It's a three-dimensional mesh structure of I can have multiple layers, think of it as a 3D spreadsheet of each one of those cells in that 3D spreadsheet is doing its own separate thing. Now, all of a sudden, I've increased not only in area, but also in volume, right? So now all of a sudden I've got a lot more processing capabilities in there, which is needed for things like high-end graphics, for 3D modeling, for financial services requires a lot of modeling type of interactions or modeling type of equations that they have to go through. A variety of different things, right? A lot of this is driving the chip manufacturers to build quantum chips. The piece of it that we need to understand is, well, how do we make sure that those chips are used for good and not for evil?
Right.
So we'll start talking about things like, well, what do we do to prepare ourselves for the impact that these new chipsets are coming out with, right? So we start looking at the timeline associated with it. So if we look at it, the time to start validation on what your quantum safe encryption strategy is for non-production environments is probably now. You need to understand and identify what your roadmap is going to be for an organization, right? So what are we going to do to start planning these things out? And then we need to start looking at, by the end of the year, start phasing out or doing a phased rollout of some of those external sites, right? So this is preparation for the future, because some of the changes that are coming up, and this is highlighting in the article, by 2030, there's going to be a deprecated classical encryption. So the 112-bit encryption has to be phased out, right? That's a decision that was made by NIST. This is their recommendations, right? And then by 2035, you have to have uh, those old encryption standards need to be fully disallowed, and you need to have PQC fully implemented, right? So post-quantum cryptography needs to be fully implemented. The benefit here is really understanding, number one, what do I need to do? Number two, how am I going to do it? And then third one is really start moving on getting it done, right? So being able to turn around and say, you know what, we've got a fairly significant window to follow. But if you look at it, 2035 is 10 years away. There's a lot of things that have to be done for that. Working with manufacturers and vendors like Citrix and NetScaler, working with partners like XenTegra, working with your own compliance and risk management teams within your organization to make sure that they're aware of the impact of this and start figuring out what we need to do and how soon we need to do it. And that can be done through identifying risks and identifying, doing that risk assessment early to determine where what is the prioritization for this.
So how is Citrix helping readiness to the new standards? It looks like from the article, it talks about Netscaler's long-term vision for this post-quantum cryptography era. And there's some release milestones listed in here. It looks like in April, the Netscaler platform is offering some NIST-aligned cryptography algorithms, I guess. I don't know what those weird characters are or weird acronyms are that are in the parentheses, but there's a private tech preview giving customers a head start at this point, right, Todd?
Correct.
What else is Netscaler doing here?
Yeah, so the critical thing there is we introduced that as a private tech preview back in April. We're expected to go GA this month, which is August. That'll be generally available, right? And it's going to allow customers to really deploy quantum resistant encryption into their production environments on their NetScalers. The benefit here is going to be start preventing people from getting access to these bad actors, access to some of that cryptography information that could be used in the future and could impact business, your company's business in the future when the ability to decipher is, a reality as opposed to right now it costs too much to kind of dig through that amount of data and decipher everything. It takes too long, very expensive, very time consuming. Once that curve starts getting a little bit more, a little faster and a little bit more resilient, that's going to become an issue. So preventing it now, doing some prevention steps now is going to pay off in the future.
Yeah. I think it bears mentioning that the article does reflect that Netscaler became the first ADC platform to offer the NIST-aligned cryptography in April. That bears mentioning. And also, but in practical terms, Todd, in August or this month or later, would it be understandable for a customer to deploy like a NetScaler that's leveraging this encryption in front of their secure data, and then application servers would only be allowed through that NetScaler to get to the secure data using that encryption method? You can still use the old encryption method to get to the app, but then to get the data, you need to use the new one. So it makes it very difficult, if not impossible, probably impossible. If a actor were to get that post PQC encrypted data, they would have a very difficult time getting at the core.
Yeah, and I think the critical thing there, Bill, is that you've got NetScaler doing a function it was designed to do, which is an application level firewall, right? And it's being able to, hey, we're not just going to block the traffic, we're actually going to inspect the traffic as we're going. and apply additional criteria, additional capabilities, or additional controls and parameters onto that data to make sure that it doesn't pass through the information. Just because the source and destination matches up like a typical firewall, we're actually looking inside the packets and seeing what is the critical pieces of information that are going through that port to get out to the destination, and blocking it where appropriate.
Yeah. So some additional elements in this article. It looks like these are certain security frameworks, I guess. FIPS is referenced here regarding Department of Defense. Do you know much about this, Todd?
I happen to know a little bit more than the average bear about this. So earlier this year, we had a team that focused really hard on getting our DoD APL certification for our NetScaler, specifically our FIPS appliances. This is basically, it's an approved product list that basically allows the U.S. Department of Defense and other agencies that recognize DoD as a standard to leverage the NetScaler in both classified or highly secure environments. And it was really a stamp of approval because it needed to be able to say, hey, this is complying with the FIPS standards. It's also giving us ability to get into to get that validation. It was a lot of testing, a lot of back and forth around testing it, reviewing the results, retesting, reviewing the results, and it wasn't just Citrix and DoD. There were other agencies that were involved and other third parties to get engaged in that testing and certification process. A couple of other things besides just the APL certification is, supporting HTTP3. That was critical as well. Once again, anytime you get further and further down into the protocol stack, tends to be the more secure and the more optimized that traffic is. So there were some changes there, as well as, one of the biggest changes as well is the way we handle DNS security.
Yeah.
Right. So, the challenge with DNS is it's a very open standard, right? So DNS was one of the original open source projects, right?
Yeah.
How do we figure out what the correct name and addresses are? Because humans think in names, computers think in numbers.
Correct.
And when you go and say, I need to go to www.citrix.com, there's a series of IP addresses associated with that. We don't need to know that URL is associated with a dozen or so different IP addresses and know the routing for there. So domain name services, DNS, basically had to be created to allow the internet, the inner networking to occur and be understandable for, us humans.
Yeah. And go ahead, Danny.
Well, I want to go back to the previous one, HTTP3 over QUIC, QUIC. Is that how you say it, QUIC? Yep. I had never even heard of that until last week, and now I understand it's basically when you take TCP and flip it, I think, to UDP, and it's something Google invented to make those TCP connections that don't really need to have all the packet loss monitored and captured work more efficiently.
Yeah, and this is where
pretty much where everything's going to go, is what I understand.
Yeah, and Andy, this goes back to the TCP versus UDP conversation. UDP being kind of connectionless, where you don't need to receive an acknowledgement, but yet TCP requires an acknowledgement on every single packet, which creates
in order
some slowness.
In order,
right?
They acknowledge all the packets in order, so you have no choice other than to wait.
Yep.
Yeah, it looks like QUIC is a relatively new protocol.
Yep.
Leverages UDP versus TCP based on clicking through the link in the article. Very interesting. I'd never heard of this before until today either. All right, so A couple other things in the article. Apparently, there's a new instance level security dashboard in the Netscaler console. Todd, why don't you talk a little bit about the Netscaler console? That's come up in a couple of situations with our customers recently where they had ADM and they didn't know what Netscaler console was. They didn't realize it's available in the cloud. Talk a little bit about Netscaler console first.
So Netscaler Console is an interesting product. It's been around for a while. We've had different names for it.
Right.
So, if you remember back in the day, we had NMAS, which was a management and administration console, right? That would sit in front of your fleet of Netscalers. And by the way, a fleet can be anywhere from 2,000 or even more. We always refer to it as if you had more than one Netscaler that you needed to keep in sync with each other as far as configurations, you want to do it from a single console or a single config file that you can push out to all of them. So NMAS was the first piece of it. Then we rebranded it called ADM, which was Application Delivery Management piece of it, which was very similar to what NMAS could do. And think of it as I've got a management console that I can control all of my Netscalers and all of the components of the Netscaler in there. The most recent iteration of it is called Netscaler Console. The critical thing is that Netscaler ADM and NMAS used to be a separate license.
Right.
And it was limited as to how many Netscalers you could control or how many instances of Netscalers you could control. We have changed that with Netscaler Console to include all of your Netscalers, regardless of what version they're on, whether they're a virtual appliance, so a VPX, whether it's a physical appliance, being an MPX or SDX, or even if it's a containerized version of a Netscaler. All those can be managed within the Netscaler Console. What we have added into Netscaler Console is not only the ability to control and manage the configurations, but also get notifications when things like certificates are expiring.
Right.
Or when there's been CVE notifications that are applicable to your Netscalers, or if there's any other type of notifications that need to be updated. As part of the Netscaler Console, and the Netscaler Console can also be run as a service, so it doesn't need to be consuming servers in your environment. It can actually be connected to the internet and have a management console as a cloud-based service. Right. Depending on which customers we're talking to, some of them are all in for having management consoles in the cloud, and other ones are saying, "Hey, we need to hold off on doing that right now." But it really gives you the ability to manage your fleet of Netscalers across the entire organization. It's got all the security tools built into it from an authentication perspective, from an administrative authentication perspective, as well as being able to do things like scheduling downtime, scheduling automatic updates, doing all of those management tasks that used to be manually driven can now be automated and optimized.
Yep, and what this makes the point is that it, like you just said, it makes it easier. The security advisory dashboard to track vulnerabilities and prioritize updates and stay in compliance across the Netscaler fleet. That's an important takeaway, I think, here. The last item in the list is our reCAPTCHA v3 support. So this is really around bot detection, probably bad actors trying to brute force websites or what have you, right, Todd?
Yeah, and I think this is kind of where we're catching up to a lot of other systems that are out there that used to be a third-party system that you'd have to bolt on to do advanced authentication, or I like the way they put it, low friction authentication or low friction additional authentication, right? So we've all been to those sites where it says, "Hey, how many fire hydrants do you see in these 9 photos? Which ones?" That's an example of what reCAPTCHA does, right? A bot is not going to be able to go and tell you that. It's to really identify, is there really a human interacting with my system? And sometimes it's not looking at the fact that it's picked the 3 fire hydrants out of the 9 options, the 9 photos. It's actually detecting that the mouse is actually moving and that the mouse is not, it's not an auto select button.
Right.
There's a variety of different tools and techniques of doing that, but it's now part of a lot of the customers' multi-factor authentication workflows. And now NetScaler supports that capability as well.
Yes. So we're at the end of the article, and it really kind of summarizes things here regarding NetScaler's commitment and that Citrix's commitment to security innovation and bringing things like this to the forefront, and taking them and moving them forward and investing in better securing the environment and for customers now and in the future. Right, Todd?
Yeah, absolutely. And this is once again, commitments that we made several years ago to becoming much more security focused.
Right.
And I'm sure, you guys remember the old security by design slide that was in all of our presentations that really didn't get into the depth of how we're actually doing it. Now we're starting to explain to customers and partners and, end users in some cases, what exactly we're doing around security, right? And how we're not only leveraging industry standards, but in some cases, kind of expanding our own standards to become industry standards, right? So there's a lot of things that we're doing, specifically leveraging our experience doing it, web app firewalls or application firewalling, the ability to actually optimize and manage the individual packets of information in that flow. And then being able to leverage not only the hardware, but also the software associated with our NetScalers.
Right. Good stuff. So I want to point out at the very end of the article, there's a reference to a multi-part blog series on the community site. And we talked about this a couple of weeks ago on the podcast, about how we'll probably start leveraging the community tech blog sites for some additional content. And there's a couple of articles out there that kind of add to this from a technical perspective that explain some of the things we talked about in a lot more detail. So I would say if our listeners are interested in that, we very well could do another podcast on one of these or both of these. But if you're interested in more information, you can reach out to one of us or go to the blog series. Any final thoughts, Andy, Todd?
Yeah, I'm just excited to see that this application delivery controller app firewall thing that's, been around for, I don't know, 15 years now is just continued to evolve to put us in a position where what it's always done, which is prepare you and protect you in scenarios where, you may not protect yourself through code or what have you, just becomes more and more applicable as systems around us get smarter.
Yeah. And I think a critical thing on here as well is you've probably seen over the past 6 to 12 months a lot more interaction with customers from an information sharing perspective, right? So being able to, up-leveling our blogs, increasing our overall tech zone messaging, right? So we've talked about this on a couple of other podcasts around Citrix Tech Zone, which is really the technically focused site that has a lot more detail than just the blogs, right? This is a community site, and it's really driven around, the technical content. That's where you go get your POC guides and your evaluation guides and things like that, as well as it's a really great place where other contributors put information as well, to go deeper into the products and the services. But Bill mentioned at the beginning of the session here that there was a webinar last week, and there's a webinar series now called "What's New, What's Next," and that is typically presented by either our SVP of Global Services, so customer success, or one of our CTOs tends to drive that. And we've had Ryan McClure, who's our Senior VP of Customer Success, and we've also had Bill Gray, who's one of our field CTOs. kind of lead the discussions on these what's new, what's next. They're scheduled to be there's going to be a regular cadence of those. I think right now they're quarterly. Probably there's enough changing that could require them to be more frequent. Certainly because the information is coming out at a much faster pace, but there's also a lot of innovation that's happening very quickly. So definitely take advantage of paying attention to those what's new, what's next webinars. And then there's also a series of there's a series of Citrix Connect events, which are pretty much spread out across the globe. They are more customer facing, customer interacting. There's actually a Citrix Connect event coming up in Washington, D.C. in September. There's still space available for that as well. So I will make sure we talk about that. And then finally, we've also got great partners like XenTegra who do not only podcasts like this, but we also work with them on doing live events and things like that. So definitely, leverage. This is a day when this is a time of the industry where a lot of people need to kind of get up to speed quickly, and some of these events and activities are certainly helpful for that.
Yep, absolutely.
Yep.
All right, guys. Anything else?
No, Bill,
All right.
I guess just to piggyback on Todd's comments, it's good to see new Citrix getting to be more like old Citrix in terms of community and knowledge sharing.
Yeah, for sure. All right. We'll see you all next week.
Todd, when's Synergy coming back?
There you go. That's
It's coming back in our thoughts and prayers around, and it's being rejuvenated under Citrix Connect.
That's fine.
But,
yeah, I'm just giving you a hard time. That's the answer, and truthfully, it does make it more accessible and reachable for more people.
Yep. And I'll be the actual host of Citrix Connect in DC. So.
Oh, you will. I'm planning to be there, so I'll see you then. All right. Thank you, guys. We'll do it again next week.
All right.
Thanks
Thank
for
you.
joining, Andy. It's been a while since you've been on, so appreciate you joining today.
Not a problem. I'd rather be doing that than what I am doing, but must get the other stuff done.
Yeah, got it. All right. Thanks, guys.